Hello everyone. As part of learning big data with Hadoop and Spark, we have seen the fundamentals of yarn. Now today we will be talking about how yarn takes care of scheduling the jobs. Now it is the job of the yarn scheduler to allocate resources to the jobs whenever they are requesting, and it follows certain policies according to the jobs we are trying to submit, and when the cluster is established they set up a policy of resource allocation. There are no fixed best policies, but every cluster during configuration they set the policy of resource allocation. Now when you are working with yarn, there are basically three type of schedulers are available: FIFO scheduler, capacity scheduler and FAIR schedulers. So we will be talking about these schedulers. Just like in operating system we have various schedulers when multiple jobs are submitted at the same instance of time. Here also we are talking about if multiple users are submitting the jobs at the same instance of time, how do we allocate the resources, right? And how do we schedule the jobs? The first one, FIFO scheduler, being the simplest one, first in first serve or first come first serve policy or first in first out. So it uses a queue of jobs that are being submitted, and the jobs are scheduled in the order in which they are submitted. It will not change for high priority jobs, it will not change for low priority jobs, nothing. The jobs are scheduled in the order in which they are submitted. What are the advantages? Being the simplest one to understand and no more complexities are attached to this. What are the demerits of this approach? Suppose a long scheduled job, a long time taking job has submitted first and a short term taking job is submitted in the second position. Say for example, a job which is taking much time is given into the queue. Until this job is completed, the smaller job has to wait. So the wait time for the job will be increasing whenever you are following first come first serve or FIFO scheduler. So which one should I use? Can I say completely this is to be disqualified? Definitely not. It depends on what are the priorities. We don't mind we don't mind a short term job to wait for a long term one to complete. We go for this FIFO scheduler. Then capacity scheduler. What is this capacity scheduler? In this a separate queue is allocated for smaller jobs, while another queue will be there for longer running jobs and a separate queue is maintained for smaller jobs. So we call this as capacity scheduler, and within that it again follows FIFO algorithm. Coming to the third one, FAIR scheduler, there is no separate queue, and also we try to make sure a smaller job will never be waiting for a longer job to complete. So how do we do this? They are trying to share the queue capacity, or they are trying to share the available resources. This is how the FAIR scheduler works. First, suppose I have submitted a job which is taking a longer period in order to complete, and there are no more jobs submitted for the execution. In such case, all the resources that are available for that particular job queue are given to only this single job. After some point of execution, suppose another job is submitted. Now what happened? Two jobs are there sharing in the queue, or they are submitted to the same queue. Now all the resources corresponding to that queue will be shared by the two jobs on 50-50 basis. So each one will get their own share of resources. Then suppose after some point of time, when these two jobs started running by sharing the resources, a third job is submitted. Now what happens to the resource sharing? Each job will get 1/3 of the resources allocated for the queue. So every job will get its own share of resources. No one will be waiting for any other job. So that's why we call it as FAIR scheduler. Everyone has a chance of getting the resources and starting the execution. So what are the number of resources? Three schedulers. First one the FIFO scheduler, second one capacity scheduler, Third one, fair scheduler. FIFO follows the first come first serve, wherein even if it is a smaller job, it has to wait until the previous longer running jobs have to complete. Capacity scheduler, a separate queue is maintained for smaller jobs. Fair scheduler, the jobs will be running simultaneously by sharing the resources in a fair manner. Now, if you see and say for example, a longer running job has started, after some point of time a smaller job has started and it has got its own share of resources. Once the smaller job completes the execution, the resources that it releases are again given back to the job which are running into the queue. Now, if you try to see Hadoop schedulers, this is FIFO scheduler. Try to see by the colors, the green one, try to identify this is one job which is comparatively bigger, and there is a second job in blue color which is comparatively a smaller job. Now, what happens when we are following the FIFO scheduling? Until job 1 completes its execution, the job 2 has to wait, right? On the other hand, capacity scheduler, first job is running in a separate queue and the smaller job is given in another queue. If you see the jobs queues, there are two types of queues, queue A, queue B. So, a separate queue is maintained for smaller running jobs. On fair scheduler, job 1 has started whenever job 2 is submitted. If you see the dotted line, this tells when job 2 is submitted. So, during this time, job 2 also starts a simultaneous execution by taking its own share of resources. Now, how the capacity scheduler configuration is done? The capacity scheduler allows sharing of the Hadoop cluster along the organizational line. What do we mean by organizational line? Every queue will have its own set of resources, because in capacity scheduler you have two types of queues. One for smaller execution jobs, for smaller time execution jobs and longer time execution jobs. Separate queues are there. For every queue, a separate set of resources are reserved. So, in such case we call it as organizational line of the queue, and the capacity scheduler allows sharing of Hadoop cluster along the organizational line, where each organization is allocated a certain capacity of the overall cluster. Two queues are there. The smaller job running queue will get smaller portion of the cluster and the longer one will get a longer share of the cluster resources. And each organization is set up with a dedicated queue which is configured to use a given fraction of the resources, right? And again, once I set up the queues will be going again in FIFO manner. And what exactly happens in this? Say for example, the smaller running jobs are empty. Right now I did not submit any smaller time requiring jobs. So, the jobs which are submitted to long time running queue can use the idle resources of the smaller execution job queue. So, say for example, I have 3 IO devices and 2 processing components, say for example. Now, for longer term execution jobs, I am allocating 2 IO devices and 1 processing component, and for smaller execution jobs, I am allocating 1 IO device and 1 processing component. Right now, the smaller running job queue is totally empty. I did not submit any jobs to them. So, when you are executing the jobs in the longer time queue, what it can do is it can share the, or it can use the resources which are idle, kept for the reserved for the smaller running jobs. We call this as one queue utilizing the idle resources of another queue. We call it as queue elasticity, right? So, in capacity scheduler there is a concept called queue elasticity, wherein the idle resources of one of the queues is utilized by other queues.